So everybody's like, what the fuck? Why are you clapping? All right. So I'm sweating my balls. I ran to the car. All right. Well, we're sitting here with Nick York, Professor York, a.k.a. Professor York, and my buddy Connor Anderson.
Hello.
We are in Denton, Texas at Dark Age. Dark Age, right?
Yep. Dark
Not
Age
not
tattoo.
ages, but age.
That's a commonly made mistake.
I know.
Actually.
I always want to. It's age, bitch. Yeah. Do I call you Nick?
Yeah, you can just call me Nick.
Okay. This is my first time meeting Nick. I've been following you for a while. I think I was already following you on Instagram because I saw like you do cool older flash.
Yeah.
Old traditional designs, and I was already following you. And then one day, me and Connor were just talking at the shop, and he was like, "Yeah, I used to work with this dude," and because me and Connor love traditional, and he's like, he does these cool like turn of the century, or I don't know, what would you?
Yeah, like turn of the century style traditional. It's just like American traditional with a heavy emphasis on the antique style and the time period that I kind of like to stay around, give or take 10, 15 years is the turn of the century.
Right.
But a lot of people just call it antique traditional.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like the umbrella term.
It's really cool to me. Like it's original, and yet you're doing old designs. But like I don't see anyone else even. You probably know of some people that do similar designs, but I don't know. It's really unique to me. It's cool because I love the history of tattooing. Not nearly as in depth as you do, but that's so. When I first started the podcast, I'd already known about you and was following you. And that was like one of the people I told Connor, I was like, man, we got to get Nick on the podcast because, I don't know, you're an interesting dude. I can tell just from your Instagram, you know, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I saw the podcast. When I saw that I had gotten mentioned, I was like, oh, I got to go check this out and see what was said. So.
Yeah, I was super stoked that you said yes because we had talked about it and I was like, I don't know if he would do it, but.
No, I told him. I was telling him whenever you were gone, I was like, yeah, Nick. I was like, Justin asked me if you'd be down to be on the podcast. And I was like, yeah, probably so. Just reach out and message him and ask.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to say yes to a media opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a smart move.
Stoked to be here. Yeah, your room is dope. Like,
Thank you.
I haven't even I've been setting up the podcast since we got here, and I haven't had a chance to look at like your old machines and stuff. I was wondering if you had some, and it seems like you got a lot. So.
Yeah, this is one of them. This is a replica of an old O'Reilly machine, the first machine that was ever patented. So
oh wow,
that's super cool.
Yeah,
It runs too.
O'Reilly, what's his?
Samuel O'Reilly.
Right, I think I've heard you mention him before.
Yeah, he's the dude that tattooed in New York in the 1880s and 1890s, all the way until he died, and he patented the first tattoo machine in December of 1891.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I know it's like disputed whether or not the first patented one was actually the first one, but like
there's a debate between him and another New York tattoo artist of the time named Elmer Getchell, and they actually worked together for a very brief period of time. But it's like I said, a debate, so it's kind of hot, you know.
Be careful, I see it.
Hot debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say it was probably Samuel O'Reilly. His tattoos were very inventive for the time, so I can only imagine that creativity would spread into other avenues, such as, making stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So is he like a big inspiration of yours that makes you like that era of?
He's my favorite tattoo artist from that time period for sure. He was just insanely talented for his time. Like, I mean, he was doing stuff in 1890 that, I mean, would still be very impressive today. And he was just so far above the rest of the people that around him. I mean, there was a couple other tattoo artists of that era that were really good, like Stephen Lee. He was also a pretty good tattoo artist from that era. There's actually a photo of a back piece that Stephen did on a gentleman named Wesley Baum. And if I recall correctly, O'Reilly wrote on the back side of that photo talking about Stephen Lee doing it all by hand and how Stephen Lee was a good tattooer. So even O'Reilly himself credited Stephen for being pretty good.
Right. Wow. Back piece in 18 what?
That back piece that he did on Wesley Baum was in the 1880s.
Jeez,
So
that's crazy.
if I had to guess off the top of my head, 1887, maybe 1888, maybe a little bit earlier. Definitely mid 1880s to late 1880s, not like 1890 or 1881 or something like that.
So does this like predate acetate stencils? Like,
Oh, for
how
sure,
were
for
they?
sure.
How were they just freehanding with the machine?
No, they had different like forms of stencils back then. You know, an early form of stencils was the nitrate stencils. Those predated acetates. And then they also had like in England a really popular stencil style was like the hectograph pens on tracing paper. So there was definitely multiple ways of stenciling tattoos prior to acetates. To be honest, acetates, I don't really collect them because they became way more popular post the time that I personally collect or find interest in. I do have a couple acetate stencils, but they don't really do much for me.
Right. So
I know a lot of traditional Japanese artists way back would actually hand paint it on. They would just use, regular brush ink, watercolor ink and stuff, and they would paint a few lines and then go in and tattoo it and do them line by line.
Yeah, I mean, drawing it directly onto the skin is always
Yeah.
going to be an option for tattoo artists of all eras. But Japanese artists, I mean, I'm not too well versed in Japanese tattoo history as maybe, American or English, but obviously they're great artists, so they're probably going to be able to draw something on, no issue.
do we know who first, like, who we accredit the first, like, American tattoo artist? Like, where did it come from?
So the first known professional tattoo artist is a gentleman named Martin Hildebrandt, and he opened up a tattoo shop in the Bowery in New York. And Jesus, it's been years since I've read about Martin Hildebrandt, so my dates might be a little bit off, but I know he died in 1890. He died in a mental hospital that he was put in by his family. But so he died the year before the machine was patented. But God, if I recall correctly, I think he opened up the first tattoo studio in the 1870s. I want to say. I like I said, I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. But he was tattooing in New York before then. But that was when he, I guess, officially opened up a shop. And from all records that we have now, his shop is the very first documented establishment specifically for tattooing.
Wow.
Yeah.
His Wikipedia says it was in a tavern in Manhattan in 1870 or 1872. So I don't know if that's a disputed date.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information about him online, so you could look it up. But 1870s is the kind of era.
And did he like immigrate here from somewhere else and brought tattooing, or did he start here?
God, if once again I would have to fucking dust off the stuff. I feel like he was might have been a German immigrant.
Okay.
I could be wrong about that though. Admittedly, I know like O'Reilly was from like Connecticut, so but well, he lived in Connecticut prior to tattooing. Anyways, I'm not familiar with Hildebrandt's lineage off the top of my head.
Right. Who are like some of the main figures that you've studied the most about, other than O'Reilly?
Well, I helped produce a book about an English American / South American tattoo artist named J.T. Clark, and he's probably the guy that I've done the most research about. Now I can answer a lot of questions about him off the top of my head,
right?
But he was born English. And then his father, and one of his brothers fled England for unknown reasons, and then moved.
Scoundrels.
Yeah, moved to Galveston. And,
oh, wow.
And they relocated to Galveston, Texas. And he was in Galveston for a little bit. And then he, after his stint in Galveston, he moved to South Africa. And we believe somewhere around the time of him moving to South Africa is where he picked up tattooing. It's possible he was tattooing right before he left Galveston for South Africa, but I would say he probably picked up in South Africa.
And what year was that?
1905 or 1906. I know his earliest flash sheets that we have of his are dated to 1906. And the nice thing about Clark is he dated everything, not just the year, but the month and the day.
Wow. So he's ahead of his time with that, because it's like common practice now.
Yeah.
Well, not month. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, what made you get into him? Like, well, let's take it further back. Like, what got you into the history of tattooing?
I just think the history of anything is really cool. I think there's something inherently fascinating about our past, because it's a time that we lived and a time that, you know, people were around in, obviously, but there's also something that feels so alien and foreign about it to me that I'm like, I don't know. I just personally find the past very fascinating. So any field or career that I would have gotten into, I probably would have been really interested in the history of it, because that's just is kind of where I've always naturally gone. So me being a tattoo artist, it made sense that I would get into the history of tattooing. If I would have been a firefighter, I probably would have gotten into the history of, you know, being a firefighter.
Sure.
Which I have gotten a little bit into that history, because I do think firefighters and fire trucks are cool. So
I was telling him on the way up here about there's roughly genetically humans as we exist now began to exist around 30,000 years ago, but we only have a written history of around 2,000.
yeah.
And so just that massive percentage of our history that's lost, it's kind of interesting how easy it is to forget our history or to kind of lose perspective on what it was like. So what you mean about it being foreign, to look back on the history of something, it's hard to look at it and have a modern perspective and then put yourself in the mindset of somebody who lived at that time with the information they had and the culture around them. It's just so different from anything you know now that it's almost like being in a movie or in some kind of a different universe that you're trying to place yourself in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions I had for you, is because I'm the same way. Like, as soon as I knew tattooing is what I wanted to do, the first thing I did was dug into the history of it.
Yeah.
You know, like, I wanted to know where it came from and, like, who the legends of it were, you know, who got it to this point. And it seems like that's lost on a lot of newer tattooers. Like, so many that I know that are, like, within 5 years, you know, they've started within the last 5 years, don't know anybody, don't give a shit. Like, if you were to tell them, they're not like, oh, that's interesting. They're like, who gives a fuck? They sucked, you know? And that's fucking crazy to me. Like, such a weird perspective to have. But, like, I feel like it's important. Like to really know your craft and, like, I don't know, to just really cherish what you do. I feel like it's very important to know where it came from and who you're, you know, the giants that you stand on the shoulders of,
The
you know?
precursors.
I think history appreciation in general is an old man's game, because I think a lot of kids don't look at time the way maybe people that are a little bit older look at time, and they're not as mortality conscious. And so obviously they're not going to care, because they're living their own life, and they can't slow down to think about the life of somebody prior to them, even if it maybe relates to them because they shared a profession. And I think a lot of these young tattoo artists that you mentioned, not only are they young to tattooing, but they're just young in life in general. I mean,
Sure.
so I wish I could say I'm not surprised that, you know, the 20-something-year-old kid doesn't really care about the guy that was tattooing in the 20s, but maybe, you know, when they're in their 50s, maybe they will care.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Not everybody's bitten with the history bug. It's kind of like and you know, it's not crucial information for them to know anyways. Like,
Right. In their everyday life.
I think back in the 80s or 90s, it was way more crucial to know tattoo artists that came before you, because you were still using stuff that they were using, such as their flash or the way they tuned their machines. So there was knowledge for you to gain from those people.
There's a direct connection.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the younger generation, they don't use the machines that were used back then. There's very little knowledge, in my opinion, that they see value in from the past.
It used to be a lot of industry secrets. I've heard old school guys talk about how it used to be such a big deal to know about, or to have it, you know, to have access to like an Ed Hardy book. And even now, it would be a big deal if somebody has an Ed Hardy flash book. They're so rare and expensive, one of the originals. But, you know, nobody really puts as much weight on it now. A newer traditional artist wouldn't necessarily. They might pull a few pieces from it, but I feel like, say, in the 90s to have an Ed Hardy flash book would have made you a lot of money. That would be considered valuable, and you wouldn't want other people flipping through it trying to take designs because
Right.
that's kind of your income.
I've heard old school guys tell stories about if they had a Spalding and Rogers catalog, they would like shred it. They wouldn't throw it away in fear that like some other tattoo artist would rummage through their fucking garbage
and find references.
or somebody who wants to be a tattoo artist. You know, they would gatekeep is a popular word now, but that information, how to acquire it.
I think gatekeeping has its pros and cons, but gatekeeping to that degree does nothing but destroy your history. And now they're mad that the younger generation doesn't care about the history, or bare minimum, they don't have access to their own history, and they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to regain their history back. And it's like, well, maybe if you wouldn't have discarded it in the name of gatekeeping back in the 80s when you were high on meth, then you wouldn't be in that position today.
Yeah. I talk about it all the time with people, like, because there is like this fear of old traditions dying and going away, and I think some of them are worth keeping and like cherishing, and then some of them, like, they can die, you know, like some of it's, you know, through human history, humans have done things that aren't exactly beneficial or essential, you know, so some of that old shit can die, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff like bikers. The biker culture took a hold of tattooing, and it fucking rode it for years. And
they're barely letting go now.
And we're seeing the resurgence of the modern day tattoo artists that a lot of people, or a lot of older guys, have great issue with. And I've noticed that the modern day tattooer is just a rejection of what tattooing has been for the last 30 or 40 years, the biker culture.
Wow.
And it's just rejecting it. Tattooing is always going to change. During the early 1900s, tattooing had this big aristocratic vibe to it, and it was gentleman tattoo artists, and these criminals that were tattooing repainted themselves as being sophisticated gentlemen and went by the term professor, and they wanted to cover up their rough past. And then, sailors came in. It was, sailors were a big era of tattooing. Military men in the 50s. And then the bikers came along, and they got a hold of tattooing, and they were the dominant gatekeepers of tattooing. And then you had the cholo and the gangster scenes in the 90s. So at any given moment, tattooing as a whole is going to really be in control of, by a group. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of the younger kids are, taking the reins. But the positive thing is that nowadays, more than ever, the reins are in a lot of different kinds of hands because of social media.
Right.
So back in the day, it was mostly bikers that ran shops because they, kept a real tight hold on it.
Right.
It's harder to keep a tight hold on anything with, social media nowadays.
Yeah, me and Connor were talking about that not long ago, that like there's so many clicks now.
Yeah.
God, it's like endless at this point. A new style is created every day.
It's almost too big to categorize at this point. You could be, I don't know, nothing's really kept secret or sacred anymore. There could be something that one group does that 10 other groups do, but 100 others don't, and it's impossible to categorize it all.
Yeah. It's an interesting time for tattooing, and I think right now in the U.S. in the year 2024, I think a lot of people are really stressing because of the economic crisis. But one positive thing about tattooing is that it thrives in hardships. The most lucrative time for tattooing, when you read stories from old tattoo artists, they would always say it was wartime.
Wow.
World War I was a big boom in tattooing. World War II was a big boom. Wars, and maybe that has something to do with a lot of military men getting tattooed back in those days. But, Percy Waters, his whole manufacturing supply business thrived during the Great Depression because a lot of people were turning to tattooing because it was a side hustle that they could do. And, Percy was selling to just anybody in the back of Popular Mechanics magazines. So there was an influx of a lot of tattoo artists during the Great Depression, and I think we're seeing a very similar influx now. But the thing is, if you name 20 tattoo artists that tattooed in that era, it'd be hard to name 20 of them. You know, there's a lot of people started and fell off. So
Yeah, that's an interesting correlation. Yeah, I haven't even thought of it like that.
Yeah.
How much do you know about Charlie Wagner?
I know a fair bit. If I'm being honest with you, I was really, really into tattoo history years ago, and you could quiz me and ask me anything, and I would just give you an answer. The last 2 or 3 years, I found myself focusing on stuff outside of tattooing for my life, and
Yeah.
I used to know a lot about Wagner,
Mhm.
and now I'm kind of the average. But yeah, I know a decent amount about Wagner. Why? What's up?
I don't know why, but he's one of the more interesting ones to me.
Wagner was very interesting, and he had a very long career. Especially the time that it spanned was very interesting. I would say Wagner is one of the most influential tattoo artists of his time period. I would say more so than Percy Waters, in my opinion.
Yeah. So who was Maud Wagner to him?
Oh, Maud Wagner wasn't related to...
Oh, really?
That's Gus Wagner's wife.
Okay.
I think that they just happened to share a last name.
Wow.
The only relative of Charlie's that was in the tattoo business was his brother, Stephen, or Stephen, depending on however you want to pronounce it.
Hmm.
But even his brother, towards the later end of his life, he wasn't even necessarily tattooing, he was more in just the circus business. I've seen old business cards of his, and he was just like a circus showman guy, and it really didn't even mention like him being heavily tattooed. But when he was really young, he was completely tattooed by his brother and some of his brother's co-workers.
Wow.
And he exhibited as a tattooed boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I kind of wonder what the implication of that would be as far as, in that time period, there's this huge influx of artists that are coming in, and a lot of them came up and fell off, and so it'd be hard to name 20 artists now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious what it'll be like in 50 years from now, if you'll have this huge list of artists people are looking back on that they consider greats of this time, or if it'd be the same way.
Yeah, that's a
Maybe.
good point.
I don't know.
I wonder
Will
how
they
social
stand the
media-
test of time like
And
they
if
have?
social media would cement them to where it's more accessible information that you can go back and refer to, or
The
if it's
mystery
just
is
gonna
kind of
get-
not there.
It might get lost in the mix. As social media keeps going, it might just become such a massive pile of information that it can get lost, just like any other document or any other form of history.
I think social media will make the study of history way easier than it is now.
Big time.
I mean, even the average person can look up their friend's history
Mhm.
just by scrolling back on their Facebook.
Progression of them as a person through photos, and then their captions and the way they type, the things they type about, or the things that they choose to share with people.
Yeah.
People use personal journals as a big reference for history right now, like a time period to know how people talked and what they did in their daily lives is usually going to come from a personal journal. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of social media now. That is
Yeah.
everyone's
exactly.
personal journal almost.
Yeah. But
What originally when you started tattooing, was it traditional
no,
right out the gate, or
No, not even close. Whenever I first started tattooing, it was in 2011. I actually started on June 28th of 2011 or July 28th, one of those 2 months on the 28th. But no, I was super into new school. And at the time, this style called color bomb was really popular. And I don't even know if you could really call it a style, but that was the hot word for tattoo artists of that time. Was like, oh, we're going to do this sick color bomb piece. And if I had to accredit it to anything, I would say it was thanks to Eternal, a very popular ink brand that was putting out a lot of large sets with all different shades of colors. And I think a lot of tattoo artists were seeing those sets and just putting color in everything everywhere. Even I had a insane color, collection. But anyways, color bomb was the popular style, and the closest style to color bomb I would say is like new school. So that's what I was super into, was new school. And I was doing that for a little while, and then I slowly transitioned to neo-traditional, and then neo-traditional slowly transitioned into the traditional that I do now. So it was it went back in time. because my tattoos used to have a very modern look.
Mm. What initially made you? How did you develop the style you have now? Like, was it a conscious thought of, oh, this would be a cool lane to take, or was it just kind of?
I had been doing traditional, or my attempt at traditional for about a year or two. I was living in Austin, and I was doing traditional designs, but I was using way too many colors, and it just looked a little weird. And I was hanging out with the crew at Mainstay at the time, and I was good friends with Ivan, and I knew Zach Nelligan, and their stuff had a very antique style to it, and I really liked the vintage look that they had. And then I got the Stizzo book with Max Brain and Stizzo, and I cannot recall, there was a third person in that book, but anyways, that was my first introduction to antique style traditional, with the thin lines and the very fine detail and delicate shading. And right around this time, I started discovering the history of early 1900s tattooing, and I just thought it was so fascinating that traditional as we knew it, really simple, bold lines, bright colors, well, that's actually a post style of what traditional was in the early 1900s. And it was like discovering, you peel back the layer and you realize, like, it's like an album cover, and you peel back the first album cover and you realize there was the first original album cover that they didn't go with, and they slapped the new one right on top of it. Well, you're going to probably like that one way more because there's a rarity aspect to it. There's like an obscure factor to it. So anyways, yeah, it was around that time when I was living in Austin that I started to consciously make the effort of making my stuff look more antique and more old. And through that, I spoke with Ivan and Zach Nelligan at Mainstay, and they were the ones that kind of, more so Ivan, were like, you need to do this, don't use these colors, and so on. So that was what it was.
So to take it a little further back, like, because I was genuinely interested in, like, where did you grow up? Like,
I grew up in Plano, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah. Plano, Texas. I lived in Florida for a brief 3 years when I was a kid, but honestly, that time's not even remarkable. It's just, but yeah, Plano, Texas is where most of my influence comes from.
Which school did you go to?
I went to Bowman Middle School and McMillan High School. I dropped out when I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
9th grade. But Plano, for anybody that's watching that doesn't know about Plano is the classic all-American white town. It's, for the most part, it's pretty well off. Plano is divided into 3 parts: West, Central, and East Plano. West Plano is very affluent. Central Plano is middle class. And then East Plano gets a little rough. And there's like a ghetto part of East Plano by the railroad tracks. It's kind of funny. It's like almost like fictional. But
right.
I lived on the east side of Plano, and that's where I grew up.
Yeah, I have family that when I was a kid, they lived in Plano. My cousins went to Plano West, and I'm pretty familiar with that area. But so how did you get in? When did you first realize you wanted to do tattoos for a living?
I had just started getting tattooed. So when I was younger, I was super like alternative, gothy, edgy. And it just, I've spoken about this before, but it more or less, I thought to myself, what would be a cool, edgy goth career? Because at the time I was working at Hot Topic, and I was like, I was 15 thinking about what I needed to do in the future. And that's when I was like, I'll be a tattoo artist and a piercer, because I used to pierce at that time. And I was like, that's a cool job. That's like a rock and roll job, tattoo artist.
Yeah.
And I was getting tattooed at this time. I'd only had a couple, and everybody that had tattooed me had taught themselves how to tattoo. And so when I would ask them, like, how did you get into it? They'd be like, I taught myself. And that's what I did, because I thought that's how everybody did it.
Right.
I literally just thought that's how all tattoo artists started.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
Turns out.
But yeah, it was just more or less through the alternative aspect of it. Because, I see a lot of people saying being tattooed isn't alternative anymore. It still is. I mean, it definitely was 13 years ago, and it probably will always have an alternative flair to it because there's pain involved.
Right.
I don't think pain will ever be truly mainstream, so.
Yeah.
People dabble in them, but there's a lot of people that after they get their first or second one, they kind of tap out on the pain and they don't really feel like it anymore. Or,
Yeah.
I don't know, just regular people that maybe weren't hyper committed to being tattooed. They just saw it as a trend and thought it'd be cool to get something small. And after that, they were like, I don't want to go through that again. I'm happy with the one I have.
It's like the bar is raising, right?
Yeah.
It used to be just having a tattoo. Now you see with like blackouts or like, well, now it's getting pushed even further, with like, like the Black Alien Project or like, it's like the bars move. So people are like trying to be more extreme in other ways. But yeah, I agree. I don't think it'll ever be like, for normies, I mean, especially to be heavily tattooed because that's,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't stop to make the distinction between getting a tattoo and then being tattooed.
Yes.
There's definitely a distinction.
For sure.
It's interesting to me, too, what you mentioned about you saw it as an alternative career, like something that would be kind of cool or edgy. That's what drew me to it. I thought it was just like, I wanted to get tattooed. I liked metalcore bands and all these like screamo bands and stuff that were all totally sleeved up. And I just thought that was a cool look. And I was like, I want to have tattoos. Everybody says that you can't get a job if you're super tattooed, but what if I'm the one doing the tattoos?
Yeah.
And I'd already been drawing my whole life, so it just seemed like a natural progression whenever I was younger. And it's interesting to see how some people see it as like a way to make money. They don't really necessarily look at it as like they do it for the aesthetic or for the art of it. They're like, well, it's just a great way to make money. Because at one point I thought it made shit money. When I was in like ninth grade, I remember teachers, if I told like a teacher that I wanted to be a tattoo artist, they were like, oh, well, you should have a backup or whatever. Like people assume that it's like a $20,000 a year job and it can pay pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
And people know that now, but it's weird how my memory is having people tell me that it didn't make shit money.
Yeah.
Well, it's another one of those secrets they tried to keep for a long time, like I know I've heard old schoolers talk about like giving guys shit if they had a nice watch or like too nice of a car, like, hey man, you're out here fucking,
showing it off,
showboating. But then again, it seems like throughout history, tattooers have always been kind of flashy, like, no, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say to that front, there's a photo of Hoichio, who is arguably one of the most famous Japanese tattoo artists. He mostly tattooed in the late 1800s. But there's a photo of him. It's one of the only known photos of him, and he's wearing gold rings, and he's all, like, bedazzled out, and the photo is hand-tinted, and the only tinting on the photo is on the jewelry. So it's very funny that he had that photo taken of himself, and he's like, I want people to know I'm wearing gold. And it's very fascinating. I think tattoo artists have always been like that. Even O'Reilly, there's an article talking about him as being a shrewd man with a pocket watch. And I think tattoo artists are always going to be at odds. There are going to be the tattoo artists that are like, you need to keep it low key, and then there are going to be the tattoo artists that are like, no, I want to be eccentric.
Yeah.
So,
especially if you look back at, heavily tattooed people being in carnivals and things like that, I feel like there's always been a little bit of a showmanship aspect to it where when you're getting heavily tattooed, you're doing it because even if it's subconsciously, that other people are going to perceive you a certain way.
Yeah.
And you kind of want that. I think some people even say, oh, you want to be careful because, if you have a lot of tattoos, people treat you differently or they'll look at you differently. But sometimes I think that's kind of the point.
That's the point, yeah.
Even if there's negative aspects to it that you're not seeking, there are other aspects to, well, I want people to perceive me that way. I want people to see me heavily tattooed because that indicates things about my personality that I want to portray.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there's definitely I don't know. I don't want to say voyeuristic because you're not the one watching, but you know what I mean? There's a showmanship aspect to it where you're putting on an image for the outside world, even though it is still technically for you internally.
Yeah.
It's kind of that, I don't know, there's the whole dichotomy of your view of yourself, the world's view of you, and what you think the world's view of you is, or three different versions of yourself. And that's that whole, what you think the world's view of you is. I think tattoos fuel that aspect of your sense of self.
Yeah.
Big time.
One of the things that drew me to tattooing, like when I realized that's what I wanted to do for a career, was like I drew the parallels with what I saw some of the people that I looked up to was it like, I don't know, it's just weird. You know, there's a lot of things like, this is a dumb one, but how a lot of tattooers, they want French bulldogs or they want the hairless cat, but also a lot of them are into fashion. A lot of them are into obviously art, but like just kind of like you said, being eccentric, you know. And my whole life, I never felt right doing the 9 to 5. I felt like I was in fucking prison. And I think a lot of people feel that way that don't want to be tattooers, but I just knew there was something out there for me that I could like really express myself. And I always loved art. So when it clicked that that's what I wanted to do, it made all the sense in the world. I love that you can market yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you build your own brand, for lack of a better word, but like, I don't know. It's just, it's endless. Even now with social media, even more so.
Yeah.
Like you can really create a persona, you know, it just exacerbates that whole, like, just like with him, he wants like people to know him wearing gold, like in a more, like in a larger scale, like you can dial yourself in as a brand and just, you know, down to the content you create. And yeah, and I mean, and then that's art, you know, getting creative with making the content, you know, that's why I wanted to do I've always wanted to do the podcast, for a long time. But once I started tattooing, I was like, all right, this kind of gives me a niche thing that I can zone in on. And there's just so many I meet so many interesting people doing this career.
Yeah. I mean, just so many characters in tattooing.
It encompasses every group of people, it seems like, especially now as it's more normalized. You start to include more and more just normal groups.
I mean, look at us, bro. You know, I'm like, I don't even know what I am. Fucking half redneck, half into sneakers, like, and then goth guy and skater dude. You know, it's like, but like we all share this, like, you know, like we still get along, even though we live vastly different lives, but tattooing kind of brings us together, you know.
Having somebody as different as a biker.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Now there are like, I think it's funny how like now there is these, maybe it used to be that way in the 70s, I'm not sure, but now I feel like everybody kind of like, because Ed Hardy, you know, he kind of brought the Chicano, like the West Coast style. Didn't he like coin the term black and gray realism? I think I heard Freddie Negretti say that.
I'm not sure about that.
But now it's very clicked up. You know, you've got the like private studio, black and gray realism people, the black t-shirt kind of people.
Yeah.
You got the trad daddies that, you know, bitch about everybody else. And then you got, but I love it all. Like I genuinely love it all.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a little bit of a mob mentality where if you pick one, you have to be against the other.
For sure.
It seems weird to some people if you're into traditional, to also be into portrait work or something. Sometimes there's not a lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it makes sense for people, I think, in just human nature to kind of like group together and click up with where they feel like they belong, and to kind of like legitimize their views. They put down the views of others. And
that's the part that I feel like is just unnecessary, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean,
as if one style's better than the other in some way, you know.
The part that gets me is some of the infighting that I feel like you've probably seen on your end of things a lot, where you'll have traditional guys gatekeeping you and your work, and gatekeeping whether it's actually traditional or even just like your eccentric persona and stuff. I feel like there's a lot of guys that are like, that's not traditional. This is what traditional is. And just, I don't know, that's where it really gets overly complex to me, is it's like if you're all doing American traditional and you're all inspired by the same thing, then I don't really see the issue.
Well, what do they criticize about your work that's could possibly not be true? Because it's like the most traditional shit I've ever seen.
I don't think my tattooing has ever been criticized as not being traditional.
Yeah, not so much the tattooing, but
I think it's every aspect about myself outside of that.
Okay.
I mean, there was
you don't fit the mold.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point where, you know, I used to, whenever I was really into the history of stuff, and I used to dress old and wear the vest and the tie, and, you know, everything about me was as if you just took me right out of the 1900s.
Yeah.
And that was when I started really going by Professor York. And obviously my whole room looks like an early 1900s studio, and I tattoo with antique tools and, you know, exclusively do old designs. And I think a lot of people saw that and they were like, it's a gimmick. They thought it was too much, and they were like, this is like, because I was like, okay, I think it's cool if we do old designs, but what if we took it to that next step?
And lived it.
And you know, and lived it and made it an experience for the clients to where when they walked in, they felt like they were walking back in time. And I did that for a couple years, and I did enjoy that, and I do still like that. But, you know, then my interest went in other directions, and now I'm getting back into my, you know, more alternative roots from when I was a teenager, because I wasn't always Mr. Turn of the Century.
Yeah.
I was black eyeliner way before Mr. Turn of the Century. So
it's good to not get bogged down into one thing just because it became successful. I feel like just because the whole turn of the century experience that you created maybe got you a bigger following or found you a certain level of success, you still figure, well, that's not necessarily going to be who I am forever.
Yeah.
So that's not going to be what I try to be forever. Some people will try to stick with that successful gimmick beyond when they...
I think it helped me build a name for myself. And I think whenever people finally accepted it, they're like, okay, I get it now. It took a couple years. Some people got it right off the bat. It took some people a couple years to like really just sit on it and be like, okay, I guess that's his thing.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Okay, he's for real.
Yeah.
You know.
And then as soon as I think everybody finally like accepted it, I was like, okay, I wear Adidas now.
Yeah, switched it up.
Yeah, so it's just like...
Well, I love that, where you said that it's a part of the experience, because that is lost on so many fucking people. Like, it is very much. And I think the true veterans, they know that, you know, they know how important, because with social media and stuff and with like tattoo superstars and stuff, we get so caught up on the work, and it's not that it's not important, but it's almost like more highly regarded is like, what level of technique do you have, you know, where I think it's all like at least equally as important, you know, because you hear time and time again, people like, I have this amazing piece from this amazing artist, but I hate it because he was a fucking dickhead and the experience was terrible. It was trash. So like, okay, cool tattoo, but like, you know, like how are you going to live on? You know,
I mean, that's kind of like the guy you were telling me that was well known for tattooing with his balls hanging out. I mean,
oh, you'll appreciate this.
It sounds like he's not around anymore.
So I've been considering doing this little mini documentary. So where we live, Texarkana, there's a town just outside of it called Queen City. Very small, very small. I don't even know what the population is, like 12. But there was a tattoo shop there in the 80s and 90s, and it was called Ink Slingers. And this guy, so I've tattooed probably 10 people now that are in their 40s and 50s, who he used to be one of the only shops. It was like him and one other shop. And these people still have, you know, it's all the old classic 90s, like a bulldog head or, you know, a Tasmanian devil, but they are fucking solid. I mean, the color is like, ain't faded at all. And he's legendary for everybody. I ask everybody who has a tattoo from him, like, so he wears shorty shorts, like cut off blue jeans, and his balls would hang out. And he was just like, that was his legend. Like, that's what, you know, now he'd be canceled immediately, you know, this fucking, you know, but nobody ever claims he was like a perv. He just let his balls hang out. But he was a real character, you know. It was like back when it was still kind of a misfit thing.
Yeah.
And, his old shop's still there. It's abandoned. And I want to reach out to his family. I'm going to look into if any of them are still around. And, you know, I'd like to see his old flash, you know, if they're willing to, you know, show that stuff. And because, I mean, it's kind of a local hero. Hero, maybe not, but local legend, you know.
But it goes to show how impactful the experience is. If you have, I mean, obviously that's going to be an impactful experience either way, but people are going to remember aspects about the artist that did the tattoo as well as the tattoo. Like, they're going to look at it and think about, oh, yeah, I remember when I was getting this and he was an ass to me or whatever, or vice versa. Anything. It's going to impact the entire memory of the tattoo as a whole.
Yeah.
People talk about, sometimes they consider them bookmarks at that period in time in their life where it just reminds them where they were when they got it, what they were thinking about, what motivated them to get it. And all of that wraps up into one kind of, you know, conglomerate of memories that you remember as one singular event.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like your work, you know, and I don't even know you that well. I just met you today, But from what I know about your persona online, your work has a bit of you in it. Like it's very clear what your personality is like based on your work and your interests and stuff. And that to me is like cool, you know, like, yeah, some amazing piece that like, how the fuck did they do that? That's cool and all, but like, does it have any soul to it? You know, does it look like it was just copy and pasted off of a AI generated art, you know, like, and I think that's what everybody's searching for really, you know, is to find their thing that makes their art look like them, you know, a reflection of them. And so I think it's cool that.
That's crazy to hear you say that. I feel like I don't see myself that much in my tattoos, but then again, it's very difficult to be truly self-aware.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like it's hard because I feel the same way where it's like, I don't know if I see myself in my designs, but then I've had friends that don't really do art at all tell me like, oh, I can always tell like if you drew something because you draw it a certain way.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to pinpoint what it is that is, but I don't think it's something you can control. I think if you do art enough, you just sort of come out in it either way. Little things that you like, even if you're drawing a dragon and there's certain types of dragon faces that you don't like and there's certain types that you do like and you're going to use certain elements and it'll always kind of come out a certain way and it'll stray away from certain elements that you don't care for and those patterns will show up. People notice patterns pretty quick.
That's true. That is true.
So I'm from a small town on the border of Texas and Arkansas. My exposure to the goth scene is extremely limited.
Yeah.
Could you please, like, I mean, let's address, because people at home watching are going to be like, this guy's wearing a Easter bunny costume with Pinocchio nose and full makeup. And I think it's fucking awesome. Like but it's like, so like where I'm from, you just don't see people living their life, you know, differently. Everybody tries to fit a mold. And like, if you get outside that, fucking weirdo, you know, but like I was telling him, like my whole life, I've always loved like Gothic art, like anything Gothic is like really interesting to me, even though it doesn't really fit my personality. I think it's like the most interesting shit, you know, cause it's different, you know.
He reminds me of Rimber whenever he says that.
Like I fuck with it, you know, but yeah, I mean, how does your look, like what inspires that? Like,
well, it's tricky. I like to poke fun and play with the goth culture the same way that I kind of poke fun and play with tattooing. Mm-hmm. A lot of goths tend to take themselves a little too seriously the way traditional tattooers take themselves. And I have no idea why, but I'm just so drawn to fucking around heavily with people that take themselves too seriously. Mm-hmm. And because it's funny, I feel like a lot of people look at me and think I take myself very seriously, but no. Yeah, no, I mean, like even like today's outfit, it's just pure goofiness and madness, but there's still kind of like an eerie, like kind of creepy, like weird vibe about it. But goth people are so bizarre, and there are so many parallels between the standard goth and the standard traditional tattooer. So that's why it was very easy for me once I got back into the goth subculture, because like I said, when I was younger, I was really into it. And, you know, if you look at photos of me when I was in middle school, I had the makeup on and everything. I was one of the few goth kids that, you know, really went all out. Mm-hmm. And then when I got into tattooing, I kind of let it take a back seat, and all I cared about was tattooing. I stopped caring about how I dressed and how I looked, and all I cared about was perfecting the craft of tattooing. And only have the last couple years have I gotten back to my roots and caring about my visual aesthetic and caring about anything outside of tattooing. And it's cool getting back into the goth subculture and kind of seeing where it left off, you know, because there's all kinds of goths nowadays that were not a thing back whenever I stopped being goth the first time around, you know, like the new era of the TikTok goths, or, you know, the clowncore goth, e-girls, like these new labels that were not a thing back in the day, you know?
Right.
It's very interesting.
We talked about even different things like the church, the goth club and stuff like that. Just how foreign it can be to somebody that isn't acquainted with goth culture at all, they probably
Well,
have some weird imagination of what would happen at a goth club when it's realistically probably just a club.
You would think, but the thing with the church is it's not a lot of people going all out, you know, balls to the wall, like dressing crazy. It is a lot of normal people that slap a Metallica shirt on and call it a day.
Right.
I think there are definitely a couple standout examples of people that really go above and beyond in regards to like costumes or aesthetics. But for the most part, I would say the church is mostly like normal people that maybe are wearing a bit too much black. So
You're right. I've been there once, but it was when it was Lizard Lounge.
yeah.
And I may have to edit some of this, but yeah, when I graduated high school, fuck it, he was a big thing, you know, and Dallas was like teeming with like that rave culture, you know. I mean, you're from here, you know, and so we would travel up here on a weekend to go. Somebody had told us about a club called Eden, and we had no idea where it was, but like, yeah, it's open till 4 a.m. and so we drive up here and have no idea where we're going. And I don't even remember why we went to the Lizard Lounge. I think it was just one we knew about. And so we go there and we're hanging out and we meet these rich kids. And like, I mean, they're like 18 years old and they're driving a brand new Land Rover, you know, like whatever's new at the time. These rich kids, and they're like, have you ever been to Insomnia? And we were like, what's that? And they're like, when the club lets out, follow us. So we follow them over there, and it didn't open until, was it 4 a.m., I think? And it was open till 9. So we go there, and it changed my fucking life. It was insane, because I'm from a small town. Never seen shit like this. Girls are half naked. Dudes just walking around with their shirt off in the club. Like, everybody's just, like, in the best mood ever, you know? But I went back to Lizard Lounge, because after that, we told everybody about it, and everybody wanted to go.
Yeah.
So we went one night, and I got caught trying to hand my buddy, and the security was like every fucking where. I mean, it was insane. You couldn't go to the bathroom without them watching you. And so I got kicked out, and the guy was like, he went up to my buddy later, and he was like, yeah, tell your buddy those pink elephants were fire, or whatever the word of the time was. It wasn't fire, but I was like, motherfucker, he took my shit. But I remember them talking about, like, because that was like a Saturday night, and they're like, yeah, tomorrow night's church. It's like a goth club.
Yeah.
And so I never did go, but yeah.
I mean, that sounds about right for the church. I mean, I've gone to a lot of goth clubs all over the country, and Dallas, or at least the Texas goth scene, is very scantily clad compared to some other goth clubs around the rest of the country. It's a unique thing. You'll see a lot more girls parading around in lingerie, claiming it's gothic fashion when it's not. You're just wearing underwear.
Yeah.
And are you still like straight edge, I guess? Would you call yourself straight edge?
100%.
Yeah.
If there's anything that anybody can be certain about, it's that I will always be straight edge.
That's what I figured. I remember you telling me that with a strong affirmation back in the day.
It's one of the very few things in my life that I'm 100% certain about.
How does that affect your experience at like a goth club?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be somewhat well received at goth clubs, despite recent events. But yeah, I'm usually pretty talkative, and I do have a fair amount of friends there. So it's very easy for me to be social.
Okay.
And in goth club settings, I usually like to dress up and go out, and I think a lot of other people enjoy the overall stage production of the way I look.
They like seeing somebody who's actually fully goth.
Yeah. So I do pretty well being social. I think a lot of people that struggle with being sober in social settings such as a nightclub, it's because they have a hard time just being social in general.
Yeah.
And I think using alcohol or drugs
opens them up a little bit.
Opens them up. But I don't have that issue. To be honest, I don't know what it's like to be on anything. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured so. I had a feeling. I would have been surprised if you said otherwise.
Yeah. No, right.
Going to a club and everything, I always wonder if there's that temptation that's there, but
it's literally not there.
Not
it's like
really,
if you fucking saw like a bottle of bleach on the ground, you would
Yeah.
be tempted to take a sip. Absolutely.
You've never really been one to partake, so you're never really tempted to
Yeah.
get back to anything or anything like that. So.
Are drugs like a big part of the goth scene?
For the most part, I would say rave culture, which is having a resurgence in Dallas right now.
Really?
Yeah. I would say rave culture, drugs is more of a thing. I think in goth culture, alcohol is prevalent. I think it's always going to be prevalent.
Depressant.
Yeah, same with smoking. Like smoking is a big thing. Most goth people I meet will usually drink and smoke, maybe smoke weed and do a little bit of coke, but I don't meet a lot of goth meth heads.
Yeah.
I don't meet a lot of
Yeah.
people that do hard drugs. I think goths like to fancy themselves to be a little bit more elegant than that, and they
Classy.
think that, yeah.
Yeah.
Go to the punk community, and that's where you start to see the more hard drugs. But the punk community is drastically more fun than the goth community. So
Yeah, I didn't know
It's a
there was a
trade-off.
The
resurgence
guy
of
banging
the.
his head on the wall is probably shooting up.
something like that.
But
I didn't know the rave thing was like making a comeback.
I mean, I'm not super well versed on rave culture, but I think it has something to do with just electronic music making a big, because music is easier now to make than ever, and you probably know somebody that makes music, or multiple people, and chances are it's electronic based, not like they're in like a band with physical instruments.
Right.
So because electronic music is becoming popular again, because it comes in waves of popularity, I think that's what's spurring this new resurgence of like electronic and rave culture kind of thing.
Are there still like after hours clubs?
Of
and,
course, yeah.
Yeah.
But the best after hours stuff is like parties where you go meet up with your friends in this back alley in Dallas somewhere, and, the warehouse district or whatever. Obviously, there's going to be after hour clubs, but the reason why those usually don't do as well is like a little just get together. It's because you've already spent all your drinking money at their first club,
Right.
so you can't really go to a second club and drop another, couple $100 on alcohol again.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I've been long out of the club scene, but yeah.
saves you a lot of money.
Yeah.
It adds up so fast. She and I quit drinking completely, and it's phenomenal how much money you can save.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really even know the price of alcohol. I just said like save a couple $100, and I was like,
It's probably accurate.
I was like, that seems kind of high.
I mean, you could run up $100 pretty quick, especially if you're buying drinks for yourself and somebody that came with you.
A lot of dudes at the church love to buy drinks for girls.
Yeah, so I mean, you'll spend over $100 like nothing.
Yeah.
Easy.
So who is Professor York? Like
It's so weird because people used to like give me shit for the whole Professor York thing going by Professor York. Believe it or not, there was a time when that upset a lot of people because they just thought it was like a gimmick. They thought it was fake. They thought it was a persona. And for the longest time, I fought that. And I was like, no, it's who I am. It's me. And now I've kind of, been like, you know what? Sure. If it's a persona, you want to call it a persona. Yeah. So I jokingly refer to when I'm dressed in like old school clothing as Professor York. And I'm like, oh, I'm like going to be dressed like Professor York today. But it's just my tattoo name.
Okay.
But whenever people show up for my appointment, I just say, hey, call me Nick. I mean, you can call me whatever you want. If you want to call me, a lot of people call me Prof because they don't read my Instagram name as Professor.
Yeah.
They read it literally Prof. So they think like
about that. A lot of people, when I'd be working the desk, somebody would come in and they're like, I have an appointment with Prof York.
Yeah, I would get that a lot. Or people would think I'm from New York because they're like, they think the name is fake, but no, York is actually my last name. Like, my family's from New York though. But yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was an alter ego or just your nickname.
No, it's not an alter ego. As much as I like to think I would be that creative, I like to be like pretty authentic. I think Professor York is somebody that I was a couple years ago, and I'm slowly transitioning out of that. But I still, put the Professor York costume on because it's what makes ends meet.
Right.
It seems to confuse people that it's just you've essentially labeled or named an era in your life. You've kind of given a name to that identity, but everybody has different eras in their lives and stuff that they go through. And if you just kind of go back and you're like, well, when I was into this, that was
It's
punk
easier.
rock Connor. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a name for it, I guess it starts to become a bit more of a character. But
Yeah, I think it's easier for me to like explain it like that. But I think a lot of the stuff I do stresses people out because it sometimes can be a little bit different than maybe how they would go about it.
it gets a reaction, though. It definitely seems like it gets attention and it gets a following, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think people just react to it because it works. You know what I mean? You're inciting some sort of an emotion in somebody, and they're responding to it, and that's an experience that's gonna stick in their head.
Yeah,
And
I learned a long time ago, no matter what I did, I was going to do that. I think some people just elicit reactions from other people. And shortly after I started tattooing, I realized that I was one of those people. So no matter what I do, people are going to have an opinion on it. It's kind of hard for me to fly under the radar.
yeah,
So I'm like, just have fun with it at this point.
I'm sure to a certain extent, if you were to try to do something that did fly under the radar, it wouldn't feel like you. It would feel kind of normie, kind of. You're like, well, this isn't, this is kind of boring. I'd rather amp it up a little bit.
Yeah.
It wouldn't feel right.
I like to be very loud with all my choices and decisions.
Yeah.
But it does fire back sometimes because whenever you do stuff under the radar and then you regret it and you're like, maybe I should not have done that. Well, everybody saw you fucking do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, God damn it.
Fuck it. But then also, if you fly under the radar constantly, then you want to do something big, and it's almost lackluster when you get very zero reaction or you get very little, and it's like, okay, well, shit. What am I supposed to do to get that reaction? It's like a lot of these platforms where you're going to get a big reaction on social media or whatever kind of thrives on consistency and algorithm base. So if you're flying under the radar constantly and expect a sudden spike in reaction,
Yeah.
you're not going to get it.
I've been rather fortunate with like my image and just like my name as a tattoo artist, because while I might not have the most followers, I have a decent following. And from my understanding, it's kind of like a cult following. Like,
yeah.
I think the people
Love it or hate it.
the
kinda
people
thing.
that fuck with me really fuck with me. And so yeah, there are definitely tattoo artists that have 3 to 4 times as many followers as I have and more trophies and more accolades, but to say they're more influential, I don't think
not
so.
necessarily the
Right,
Not
how
necessarily.
supportive are they're following.
Yeah, so
How do you, with your insane collection of antique tattoo stuff, how do you acquire a lot of these things? Like, because is it becoming harder to find these things? Because it's becoming more common to collect them.
there's more collectors than ever. So
Yeah.
obviously it's the supply and demand is going to get kind of thrown out of whack.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we collect stuff from the past, so new stuff can't be made and added to the canon.
Right.
But yeah, it just like kind of through networks, meeting other collectors, doing some research, maybe finding out about a tattoo artist that tattooed in your town, and then you trying to reach out to the family, get a hold of them. A lot of people have stuff in their family that they don't really know about. It's just Uncle Ted's stuff. But Uncle Ted was a really cool dude to a very certain group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So what might be Uncle Ted's junk in the closet to you is Uncle Ted's entire legacy to somebody else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know. That's how Joey Knuckles, you know who he is?
I do.
Ohio. That's how he acquired like all those flash sheets from Stony. What's his name? Stony
St. Clair.
St. Clair. Yeah, just like cases and cases of flash, which
It's interesting because Stoney was well known in his own time period. He was, interviewed, and he was a big deal in his own time. So it's kind of weird that like somebody would look at Stoney's stuff, even a relative of his, and not appreciate what it was.
yeah. Yeah, that would be awesome to just land on a family member that had a trunk full of like cool shit.
Well, that's what I did with the J.T. Clark book. I'd heard about his collection, or I heard about his granddaughter that owned all of his stuff just through the tattoo history world. And one day I reached out to her because I was in San Francisco, and she was living a little bit north of San Francisco. And I visited her, and I saw it all in person, and she was telling me how she wanted to do a book about her grandfather. And she's elderly. so she wanted to do it quick, and I guess nobody ever wanted to do it, so I was like, I'd love to do it. So I teamed up with her, and her name's Judy, and she's my co-conspirator for the Clark book. But it's
awesome.
about her grandfather, which is actually really interesting because he tattooed very early. And a lot of tattoo artists that tattooed that early, if you can get in touch with a family member nowadays, it's very far removed. It's the great grandniece or, my fucking great grandfather.
And they don't know as much.
Yeah, but Judy, her dad was tattooed by his dad, so she saw in the flesh tattoos done by Clark.
Wow.
Clark died in 1918, so
wow, that's incredible.
She was seeing tattoos on her dad that were done, before 1918. So
damn,
I know.
That's awesome. Did you were you able to get any like originals from her, or she?
She gifted me a photo of J.T. Clark's head tattoo that was done by George Birtcher. Clark was completely tattooed by Birtcher, which was something that we more or less discovered as we were doing the book. Obviously, Judy knew that he was tattooed by Birtcher, but I don't think either of us had a clue as to what extent he was tattooed by Birtcher. Then we found out Birtcher can be accredited for roughly 70% of his tattoos.
Damn.
Yeah.
So not exclusively, but towards
the
end, essentially, probably.
The only other person that I know that tattooed Clark is Clark himself.
Oh wow!
So
okay.
I
Damn.
yeah. So
essentially exclusively then.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure his wife Bertha probably tattooed him. We don't know whether or not Bertha tattooed in any meaningful manner, but when you're married to a tattoo artist, you pick up the machine.
Yeah. How big was her collection of his things?
She had everything of his. She even had his hair that he shaved off the top of his head to get his portrait done.
Wow.
Yeah, she had his wallet. She had his war medals. She had ledgers and postcards between him and his wife, Bertha. He would send her postcards of the carnival that he was at, and he would put a little star on a tent, and he was like, I'm tattooing in this tent.
Wow.
And he would it was everything. The only thing from the collection that there wasn't was his machines, but they actually used to have his machines, but the family threw those away a long time ago.
Oh god.
yeah exactly.
Of all things, they kept a bag of hair but not the machine.
Yeah, it was worthless to them. Like, I need these.
They had no idea, but that's the common story.
Yeah.
And do you still keep like all of or a lot of your stencils and stuff?
I keep every stencil for every tattoo I've ever done.
I feel like I could see a lot of artists thinking that that's silly or trying to laugh at it, but then, as the years go by, you look back and somebody cares. I mean,
it's kind of a pain in the ass because if I do like a little A on you, I'm keeping the stencil for the singular
and
letter.
I think people assume also that, I don't know, I guess what offends them is they think maybe it's presumptive on your part that they're like, well, who's going to want to look at your history of stuff? But it's not always about that. It's just about preserving the history in general.
Well, all those people
like
back in the day, that's exactly probably how they felt. Nobody's going to want
they
this
might have
shit.
felt like nobody's going to want this. Yeah, exactly.
And now we're like, fuck.
You really
can't. I had
can't.
that.
Yeah, you can't assume.
People want to know me in my own time.
Yeah, I was
definitely
gonna say,
think they're going to want to know me in 100 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wish there was a way I could find it. So the reason I think I love traditional tattoos so much is my grandfather was pretty heavily tattooed for the time. Like he served in Korea. He was an Army Ranger, and I wish he was still alive and I could find out exactly who did them, but I'm pretty sure he got them in either like California or maybe Hawaii. But he had the panther, same spot. That's the reason I wanted to get it. And he had like the naked lady and the martini glass on the other forearm. A couple of like sparrows and an eagle. But yeah, I think that's why I find them so interesting,
Yeah. It was images that you've always saw.
Yeah, they're just kind of burned into my brain,
Yeah.
That's what made them cool. Tattoos cool to me.
Well, it's really interesting because when you think about like the kind of world that they were living in back then, I think tattoo history becomes way more interesting when you have an understanding of just that time period in general. For example, George Birtcher, you know, when you look at when he was really in his heyday, you know, like the early 1900s to like 1910, look at movies from back then. If you go watch a movie from like 1905, it feels fucking ancient. But then look at a photo of a tattoo that Birtcher did that exact same year. And it really like kind of puts into perspective, like just like the time period these guys were tattooing in and doing these insane dragons. You know, George Birtcher was tattooing dragons before movies had sound. I mean, that's an insane thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to collect some like old flash sheets and stuff. Or how many originals do you think you have? Like original?
So it's funny. Every collector kind of like collects different things because there's general collectors, but it's very difficult to be an overall general collector for tattoo history because everything's very expensive and you do want everything. My focus is photographs, particularly cabinet photos. So I have as far as I'm aware, the world's largest collection of cabinet photos, private collection. You know, obviously museums like the Smithsonian have a lot of cabinet photos of tattooed people, but as far as I'm aware, the private collection, I have the largest of tattooed people cabinet photos. So I don't have too much original flash, because like I said, my interest is photos, but I do have some really neat flash by Birtcher because he was one of my favorites. I have an original flash by Samuel O'Reilly, which is exceedingly rare. I have an original book of flash by a Japanese tattoo artist from, you know, if we had to guess, the late 1800s or early 1900s. So I have some very early rare flash. I had a collection of original flash by Frank Howard that I recently passed along to a friend in Houston. So I've had stuff come and go. I've had Gus Wagner flash. I've had J.F. Barber flash. You know, these are just all names from around that same period.
What about machines?
I never got into machines because machines are $5,000 each.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm known for spending money on stupid shit, but spending $5,000 on a tattoo machine has never seemed particularly smart to me.
Yeah.
Especially one that's not going to be entirely usable. It's sort of more of a display piece, and then
Yeah, it's a paperweight, you know.
Yeah.
when you do
It's
use
cool
it,
paperweight, but
But there are machine guys.
Yeah.
yeah. Have you ever read Shane Enholm's books?
I've never read his books, but I'm familiar with Shane, and I know he's a machine guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'd like to get him on the podcast.
he's a character.
He's a fucking character for sure.
He's a relic of what
Mhm.
tattooing used to be, and
Yep.
I don't know Shane Enholm's stance on myself. I doubt he would be a fan, but I appreciate that Shane Enholm exists, and I appreciate that guys like him are still around. And I've never spoken to him in great length, but I think he's an interesting guy, and like I said, I'm just glad that he's still a character because characters like him are not going to be around for much longer.
No, he's last of a dying breed for sure.
Yeah, but
Well,
there's going to be a resurgence of Shane Enholm. There's going to be people that are going to discover him and be like, I want to be like this because there's nobody else like it. So
Yeah.
that's a nice thing.
Yeah, I really want to interview him about Bob Roberts because that's one of my that's one of my heroes for sure, and I know he was real close with him. But yeah, I need to. So I before I started the podcast, I reached out to him on Instagram, and he responded, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'd do it remote." And then he was like traveling to New York, and he's like, "Well, I have to hit you up when I get back home." And then we kind of I hadn't started the podcast yet, and I already felt weird about asking him to do it when I haven't even done my first episode. So recently, he gave me his phone number, and I recently texted him, was like, "Hey man, I talked to you a couple years ago, blah, blah, blah." He didn't respond. I don't know if, it's still his phone number, maybe not. I don't know. Hopefully I can rekindle that,
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. There's not many people like that left anymore, know. Not a lot of people that it's weird that some of those old school guys, I bet you kind of touched on it earlier, but they cared more about their predecessors than we seem to now.
Yeah, I think that comes with the culture. I think respect and just biker culture was way more of a thing. So yeah, obviously that's gonna like translate to them caring about who came before them. Also, I mean, at that time, apprenticeships were way more big of a deal than they are now. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, lost my train of thought. I fucked up my own train of thought.
You got distracted. It's wild how apprenticeships are. I don't even know now if a lot of people think you do have to get an apprenticeship or what the general consensus is. It seems like it's pretty split 50-50 now.
I think people are more aware of apprenticeships than they were back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whenever I first started tattooing, I had no idea what an apprenticeship was. And I've said this before, but I really didn't. I had never even heard the word. I guess maybe I was a dumb 15-year-old kid. But, people definitely know that apprenticeships are the way to get into tattooing now. I think apprenticeships are drastically different than what people think they are. I mean, I remember when I first started tattooing, I used to get a lot of shit because I wasn't apprenticed. And they were like, you need to do this. Apprenticeship will teach you the history of tattooing. It will teach you how to build your own machines. It will teach you sterilization. It will teach you everything you need to know. And it's like, that's a very idealized version of apprenticeship.
I was going to say, they don't all teach you that.
They almost never teach you that. Mm-hmm. And it was like this, like, I think that's the thing with education. I think, and you see it with colleges too. They're like, go to college and they'll teach you what you need to know. And then you get to college and you're like, wait a second, I'm not learning really anything.
Yeah.
This is a waste of money. And it's just like, you're just, paying to play kind of. I think that's how a lot of apprenticeships are. So it's laughable when somebody's like, get an apprenticeship, you'll learn the history of tattooing. Good luck. I've never seen a tattoo artist teach their apprentice the history of tattooing.
No.
I mean, even here, I've had Rimber and Frank ask me to talk to the apprentices about the history of tattooing. But they're not my apprentices. They're theirs. So,
Yeah. And it seems like it can be that way where sometimes it's not even necessarily that you're apprenticing under a specific artist. You kind of apprentice under a shop. It's like whoever your mentor is allowing you to be in this space surrounded by a bunch of other artists. I feel like my time here as an apprentice, I remember learning equally from the whole shop, just kind of talking to everybody and watching people and picking up things here and there. And
yeah. It's different kinds of apprenticeships. There's, obviously traditional apprenticeships are still a thing, but they're definitely a lot more rare nowadays than they used to be.
Do you do a lot of guest spots?
I have been more lately. I used to hate doing guest spots. I used to hate traveling and tattooing, but as of late, I've been feeling the itch to get and travel around more. And a good way to fund that is to tattoo while I'm in a new city.
Exactly.
So
that's exactly my thought on it.
I do find myself doing more guest spots and traveling state to state to tattoo, but not because I would love to tattoo in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I'm going in a couple weeks. I would love to go to Richmond, Virginia, and tattooing is the way I make my money, and I need to make money while I'm there. So
yeah. I haven't done my first one yet. I've only been tattooing about 3 years now, but I've been talking to a few artists and planning a trip to do that. But that's exactly my thought on it. Is like, I like to travel. In this economy, it's really hard to do. It costs a lot of money. So that's my thought, is like, well, I can go there, make money that's paying for the trip, and also I've heard like a lot of people that I look up to say that it's a smart thing to do. Like you want to get better, you want to grow, travel. And learn from different people. Get out of your bubble,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And especially with a career like this, too, where there is no such thing as paid vacation time or anything like that. So if you take 10 days off to travel somewhere, you're spending the money to travel and you're losing the money you would have made while you were gone. And so it just sort of adds up. So if you can make money while you're traveling and level that out, it sort of eliminates that problem.
Yeah, it helps out immensely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to do it. I went and did a seminar like a month ago, the one that Deanna puts on, and John Nelson, the TikTok guy. I don't know if you've seen this. They do like the funny tattoo shop humor skits, but I got to meet him. He was super nice.
Do you think they're funny?
Some of them, they're kind of awkward. Like it's not the best acting, but I don't guess that's really the point. Some of them are funny because it nails it. You're like, oh my God, that does fuck. That's real shit that happens.
Relatable scenarios acted poorly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I know he gets a lot of shit from people. He told me that when he first started, you know, people are like, you're fucking giving out trade secrets and, you know, more of that old shit that's like, okay, like that ship sailed, you know, like, is that really what we're concerned about? But what I really respected about him, and he did a presentation at the seminar. What I really appreciated about it was it is a new thing in tattooing, this like marketing yourself through social media. And he was just kind of basically just telling how he's done it. And I talked to him about it because, like I said, I've only been tattooing 3 years and I'm doing a podcast about tattooing. Well, I don't know shit, you know, like I'm still pretty new, learning every day. And Quinn's like really good at teaching. So I'm fortunate in that sense, but I guess what I asked him was like, do you think it's okay if you're making content about tattooing, but like your work's not quite there yet? You know what I mean? You're not like this amazing artist, because there is this like notion that like you better be a bad motherfucker, you know, if you're, you know what I mean? Like, because you're showcasing yourself as if you're this amazing artist, but what if you're not an amazing artist? He was like, I won't say this in the seminar because people take it the wrong way, but like, you know, that shit doesn't matter. Like, you know, like, yeah, be as good as you can. But like, he was even telling me, you know, Sean Foy, when he met Sean Foy was like, you know, I fucking hated you at first. Like, I talked mad shit about you because everybody was like, well, everybody knew you sucked, but here you are famous online for being a tattoo artist. But I don't, you know, but I do think that's falls under gatekeeping. You know, it's like, oh, he doesn't deserve the limelight, you know, which is stupid, because back to the thing of you're selling yourself in the experience, right? It shouldn't just be about how good are you, where do you fall on the amazing artist scale, you know, like everybody deserves a right to promote themselves, and you have to now, you know. A lot of artists bitch about it and like, why, you know, I have to be a content creator, and like, yeah, if you don't want to, then it sucks, but get with it, or, you know.
Plus, ultimately, I always see it as you have the right to do it, because who's going to come stop you? Who's going to come here right now and say you don't have the experience to be doing this podcast?
Right.
Shut it down.
Right. It's just all naysayers, you know. But so yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if somebody says you don't have the credibility, then they probably just won't tune in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you would think, but not everybody thinks is that simple, you know.
Yeah, well, there's that fine line, you know. There's artists that like create content and everybody, you know, maybe it's cringy, maybe it's like, look at me, you know, but, and I'm very conscious of that. I try not to be that way, you know, like I try to make everything that I make content wise, like, I don't know, like have a purpose, I guess, rather than just like, oh, look at me, I'm cool, you know. Because I'm just repulsed by the idea of me doing that. Like, and a lot of people have a lot of success with that, you know, like, but yeah, I don't know. Something I kind of struggle with internally. Like, is my heart in the right place with doing this? But that's why I'm not good at just talking to a camera, just me, you know. Like, I feel weird about that, awkward. Yeah. But that's why the podcast is like so perfect for me, because I already want to meet you, and it kind of gives me an excuse. Otherwise, I'm just like, hey, can I come to the shop and talk to you? Like, you know. So this gives me an excuse to meet people that I already want to meet, and
it gives a purpose to ask questions.
Yeah,
it's pretty normal and acceptable to meet other artists and ask them questions and try to learn from them and stuff. But it can feel weird if you're like, hey, man, I'd love to come down sometime and stand in your room for about an hour and ask you questions and watch you tattoo. And
which would almost never happen.
Yeah.
You know, so.
I mean, I'm surprised you guys haven't like really asked me any hard-hitting questions. I had a feeling that I was really going to get drilled today.
Nah, fuck it.
But no, I don't. It's cool. I don't mind.
Well, what questions do you think we were going to drill you with?
I don't know.
Controversies.
Oh, no. Why do you think everybody hates you?
Well, I
keep my head in the sand, so I wouldn't.
I was
you could bring
say,
up something,
I'd
be like, that's happening? Yeah. I'd be like, that's crazy.
Well, I was going to ask you earlier when you said something about of recent events that people still accept you at the goth clubs, and I was going to be like, What are the recent events?
Did you make the Goths angry?
Yeah, but I'm always making the Goths angry in some way.
Right.
They're always getting angry about something. It's a constant state that they live in.
Yeah.
But
Well,
part
you're
of the
serving your
aesthetic.
purpose then.
there you go. Yep, exactly.
That's art. You're provoking an emotion.
Yeah. But I don't know. I know, when I saw that you had spoken to Connor on the podcast, you had mentioned that I'm a captivating figure and that some people, have a hard time assessing.
Right.
So I figured that that was going to be
Well,
something.
Connor could speak on that more than me because I haven't seen people speak negatively of. I could see where that would happen, just like you were speaking on earlier. Like people were like, "Is this fucking for real? Like this is really who you are? You're just like pretending to be this turn of the century guy." Like,
I think what made me realize it was getting tattooed by other traditional guys around Dallas, just, without name dropping or anything, but going over to Dallas and stuff and getting tattooed by a couple guys and mentioning like, oh yeah, I work with Nick York, Professor York. And they're like, oh yeah, that guy, I've seen that guy. And I was like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't expect a negative reaction. And so, I'd brought that up to you and stuff and I'd mentioned so-and-so and you're like, oh yeah, they don't really fuck with me for this or that or whatever. And that's kind of, back then I remember that's when it dawned on me. I was like, oh, so it's really cliquey. Like,
Yeah,
traditional artists don't just like other traditional artists. They have to be the right kind.
Yeah, the right kind. And I think now more than ever, there's different kinds of traditional.
I'd love to go into Elm Street and ask them and be like, y'all know Nick
oh
York?
god,
Yeah, I
They
mean,
probably-
maybe they would have a fun time with it. I've heard from people that used to walk at Elm Street that the guys at Elm Street were not a fan of me. But with that being said, I've walked into Elm Street and I've sold people working there paintings of mine in Elm Street. And I've met Oliver a handful of times and he's always been very nice and polite to me. But then again, Oliver is a celebrity, a proper celebrity. So I think he's always going to seem pretty neutral,
right?
He knows how to
He's pretty good with
Be
PR.
political.
Yeah.
how to conduct himself around individuals.
But yeah, Elm Street is a great example of a shop in Dallas that, and if I'm being honest with you, I actually don't know anybody that works at Elm Street right now. I'm not familiar with any of the artists. Actually, no, I do think Lindsay Carmichael works there.
Yes, yeah.
And Lindsay is a great tattooer. I don't think he likes me though. I saw him. I was walking by Elm Street a couple months ago, and I saw him out front, and he. Maybe he didn't do it on purpose. Maybe I'm looking into it, but he just gave me a look of, "Don't come and say hi to me." And I was like, "Okay," but I know him, and I feel like he's familiar with my work, or at least is aware of me.
Yeah.
But he's a good artist, and I like his hair. He he has this like swoop hair that
It's
I think
fucking
is
wild.
I think
yeah.
is very cool. But
Yeah.
I don't know. We're on two different ends of the spectrum, and I don't think I don't want to try to force a friendship,
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate. Like I don't like the cool kid club in any kind of anything, but in tattooing, there, like I was saying, like there's tattoo superstars, and I'll say this, like at the seminar I went and did, there was a lot of like people from Ink Master and people that are like whatever, they're famous for tattooing, like just from being on TV, and they were all super nice. Now, I mean, there was 150 people there, so they're probably being nice to everybody. But for the most part, like I met Gian Carle, and he was so fucking like just genuinely nice, like receptive. You'd say something, he actually listened and like gave advice, and that was cool for somebody who's kind of new to see. Like, look, like.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a fucking dickhead. You don't have to be like, I'm here and you're there,
I think it's a style thing. I think all the big guys in the realism world are extremely, extremely nice. And I think all the big guys in the traditional world are dicks. I think it's just funny how that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was actually pleasantly surprised when I got tattooed by Tim Lehigh, just because I expected that, thinking a lot of traditional guys are dicks, and he was pretty nice. I mean, he's a quiet older guy, but
Yeah.
you ask him a question and he'll answer straight up. I asked him about like his grips and stuff because he didn't really have any crazy size grip or anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you use what kind of tube do you use? Metal tubes? Do you use the rubber grips, or what do you use? And he was like, anything that helps with the vibration. And he started talking about how the vibrations affected his hand, and like he expanded on his answer a lot, and he was down to talk about it. And then he started talking about, and I like to play guitar, and it's hard to play guitar whenever you're having issues from all the vibration. And he was a super nice guy. He was just down to chat, and sometimes that's surprising with traditional guys. You expect him to be like, I use metal tubes.
Oh, you spit on it, shit.
Yeah, no,
it's not a big deal.
Tim's a nice guy. I met him a long time ago in Portland at Atlas Tattoo, and I was just passing through, and I remember my experience. He was very friendly.
Yeah, I had a short, obviously it was just a client artist experience, so I'm sure to some extent there's a level of politeness that he carries with any client, but still, you know what I mean? It's still kind of cool to be like, so you're a chill guy.
I've been tattooed by people that were very dismissive of me.
Yeah, so they're not always nice just because you're a client. That doesn't say everything.
Yeah.
I briefly met Tim Hendricks at Elm Fest, and he seemed like just like down to earth, nice dude. And it's just, they say don't meet your heroes. So it's always, anytime I'm in a situation like that, I'm like, fuck, don't ruin you for me. Like, like.
I've realized it's a lot less disappointing when they're smaller heroes. If it's somebody that's like, because in the grand scheme of it all, any of these people aren't going to be massive. You know what I mean? Compared to if your hero is meeting the president or meeting
right.
some international superstar, meeting Taylor Swift or something.
Even the most famous tattoo artist is a D-list celebrity compared to...
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
It's still going to be... there's a lot of them that's going to come through because they're just not shrouded in too many layers of celebrity.
Yeah.
So I think it helps. You can meet your heroes in tattooing, and
that's true.
It might actually be what
that's
you
true.
expect.
Well, that's what's funny because like when I met John Nelson and Gian, I immediately went outside and called my wife because I looked forward to meeting them. So when they were like super nice, it was just like, oh my God, thank God,
Mm-hmm.
and it went so well. Like John was like, yeah, man, come do a guest spot. And I was just like, whoa. So I called my wife and I was like, I might as well have met Brad Pitt, to me, that fucking mattered. I was more excited to meet him than Brad fucking Pitt, To
him, like if he's offering you a guest spot, if he's serious, then it's just a casual business interaction to him. He's a businessman, he's a tattoo artist, and he's conducting business. It doesn't really feel like, I'm the man and I'm going to give you this opportunity.
Yeah, I hold the power.
You're going to come guest spot at my
Kiss
shop,
my
and I'm
feet.
going to give you the keys. And it's, he's just a normal dude that's like, I don't know, I just own a tattoo
Sure,
shop.
guy,
You want
I
to
guess.
come to a guest spot? Come on by. We tattoo Monday through Friday, whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
But since I've got in, like, I started at a shop where, it was kind of like advised that we not really fuck with other shops, even in our town. It's very like, don't fuck with them. Like, just stay over here and fuck them. That's not real tattooing. And I came in like knowing that like that's not the right attitude to have. Like, I want to fucking be friends with everybody. Like, why not? Unless you make it real clear I don't want to be friends with you, and then like fuck you. But I don't know. But
at least
like,
you tried.
People don't have to fit into the same mold that I am for me to like want to. I almost want to talk to people that don't more. Like,
Yeah.
it's more interesting to me. Like, I don't want to agree on everything. That's boring.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rare perspective to have in tattooing nowadays, though. I feel like a lot of tattoo artists, or at least some that I interact with, are only interacting with me because we do similar styles. But if we didn't do the same style, they would, not want to talk to me at all. So it's interesting to meet people that have a different perspective.
Right. Yeah, I mean, have you openly got any shit from other artists? Like, I mean, where they like literally talk shit to you?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, not to me. I mean,
you're right.
Maybe in the DMs. It's kind of.
What pisses them off?
From what I sat down with a tattoo artist about a year ago, and he was somebody that I know used to have a real problem with me. We've patched up our relationship since then, but we spoke over lunch because we were guest spotting at the same shop together, and he had said something that had never occurred to me. He was like, my biggest problem with you for the longest time was everything you do just points to the fact that you don't take any of this seriously at all. He's like, I feel like I take it extremely seriously, and I take this more serious than anybody I've ever met. So seeing you behaving the way you behave and being the way you are, making a joke out of it and not taking anything serious, he's like, it bothered me and it pissed me off because it's, you know, I take it so seriously. And it never occurred to me that something that somebody would look at everything I've done and think and come to the conclusion that I don't take it seriously. Because to get good at tattooing, you have to take it seriously. You don't accidentally become good at tattooing. It's not, you don't stumble upon it. To get to, you know, put out books about history of tattooing, you got to take it seriously.
You're taking it pretty fucking serious.
I personally feel like I take it very seriously, but I don't outwardly project that seriousness. I take it so serious that I'm a little bit playful with it because I do understand the humor in a lot of the situation.
Right.
So that was an interesting revelation to have, that people would think I don't take any of it seriously. Or even like I've had people just be mad because I wasn't apprenticed, and I'm a case of what you shouldn't do, but yet somehow I worked out. So I'm a cautionary tale that doesn't pan out in their favor. So they would love to use me as this is what you shouldn't do in tattooing. But the problem is I did it, and it kind of worked out, and it fucking bothers them because they're like, God damn it. Well, normally you shouldn't do that.
Right. Well, but I think there's a difference too. Like, it's because, okay, you started at home, right? And then you eventually went and worked in a shop and have been working in a shop ever since, right?
Yeah, more or less. I started at home, worked at a shop. I worked at my very first shop for a couple months when I was 16. And then I went back to tattooing out of my house for a couple months. Then I went to a shop, and when from the ages of 16 to 17 or 18, I was bouncing between shop and home a lot because I was young, and I would quit a shop at just the slightest hint of bullshit. So if I got skipped in rotation a couple too many times, I'm like, fuck this shop, I quit. Or if I feel like people were, you know, not giving me clients because I was a 17-year-old kid that was annoying, you know. So I was quitting shops like left and right, really making a bad name for myself. But luckily, I've been able to overcome that name by what I do now, which is nice.
But see, there's a difference to me is like, I think that like energy toward the new tattoo artist who learns on YouTube, says, fuck that, I don't need anyone's help, like immediately opens a private studio and like, I'm going to bypass the whole system, you know, because the system's fucked. Like, I feel like that's more where your anger should be. And I understand that, you know, because it's almost like they're totally doing away with the tradition of tattooing altogether.
Well, I mean, it's funny to discuss what about me has upset people in the past, because by today's standards, it seems so mundane.
Yeah.
But it's for the same reason that, you know, Alice Cooper was shocking in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then when Manson came around, then they really saw shocking.
Yeah.
So, like, a kid tattooing out of his house underage isn't really much to worry about compared to this new surgence of private studios. And in 20 years, there's going to be another thing that makes the private studio kids seem like a non-threat. I think a lot of tattoo artists suck, and they don't have anything to do but bitch about whatever's directly in front of them, and they don't stop to think about how is it in relative to stuff that have happened in the past, how is it going to be different in the future. I think a lot of tattoo artists are just really reactionary. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of tattoo artists are not intelligent enough to really have that thought of, okay, is what I'm dealing with right now unique to my situation, or is it just the evolution of a situation that's been dealt with for the last 100+ years of tattooing as a profession?
Yeah.
So,
How long have you been at Dark Age?
7 years. 7 years now. and I didn't plan on being here this long. I only planned on being here for 4 years. And when I turned 25, I was going to open up my own tattoo shop. But COVID happened, and it wasn't in the cards for me. And sometimes I'm embarrassed to be working here for this long, because from the outside, people look at it as oh, he's just been stagnant for, but I'm getting over that embarrassment. And I'm just like, to be honest, I'm like I said earlier, I'm looking at ventures into tattooing elsewhere, I'm not even really focusing on tattoos that much. It's kind of funny. I feel like my tattoos look better than ever, but I'm kind of doing my own thing elsewhere, where years ago, where my whole life revolved around tattooing, my tattoos could have used some improvement.
Sometimes I think your inspiration can run dry if you're focusing on tattooing constantly. You're just getting all these different inspirations from other tattoos, and it becomes derivative and boring. And if you start focusing on other things, every now and again you'll get an idea for a tattoo that is maybe a little different from what you'd done before. I don't know. Yeah, I find that for me, at least, if I go distract myself from tattooing and go focus on some other subject, whether it's movies or whatever, I'll end up with kind of new, fresh ideas.
There's a lot of guys that are kind of surpassing myself in the tattoo, in the particular style that I do, the antique traditional, because whenever I first discovered it, I felt like I was, after a couple of years, really groundbreaking, doing flash that I had never seen be recreated, really living it. And I felt like there was no tattoo artist that could replicate a piece of flash better than I could. And now I couldn't. There's 5 or 6 I could name off the top of my head that are better than me at the style, whether it's Josh Davies in England or my buddy Bosco over in Italy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tons and tons of guys that do what I do better than me. And maybe it was really arrogant of me to think I was amongst the top of the heap, but I'm not anymore. But that's okay, because I still, everybody that I look up to, that I'm this guy's a really good artist, they're very friendly with me, and they're we love your shit, and you inspired, me a little bit, which is crazy, because more often than not, I'm either younger than them or around their same age. So it's really cool to kind of get to live that,
Yeah, hell yeah.
But
we'll wrap it up here in just a second. I wanted to ask you, who are some of your big inspirations currently
that are alive right now?
Yes. Or dead. But live.
As far as living, Rich Hardy, he's a good buddy of mine, and he's the only other tattoo artist alive I know that pushes the envelope for style like myself. So for example, Rich Hardy will pull out a back piece that was done by Professor Carroll, and it's the first time this tattoo's been done in over 100+ years. And he's the only tattoo artist that I personally know that has the resources to find the real rare and obscure stuff and do amazing stuff with it. My buddy Josh in England, he's amazing. And I look at his stuff and it sometimes pisses me off because I'm like, why didn't I think of that? But, it's a case where Josh has surpassed me. Whenever me and Josh were first becoming friends with each other, I feel like my work was a little bit better than his, but looking at his work now, he's for sure surpassed me, in my opinion. There's obviously Rich Hadley. Rich Hadley was a huge deal way back in the day, and he went off the radar a little bit, but now he's back on the radar, and he's honestly just as amazing as he was. He's just a little bit more low-key, but he will always have my respect, and he will always be in the top 5. And then you got, like I mentioned earlier, Bosco. I don't know how to pronounce his first name. I think it's Ingarand. That's how I would pronounce it. He's probably going to watch this and be like, fuck no, dude. But no.
Wrong.
But Bosco, he's a fucking phenomenal tattoo artist. And I look at his stuff and I'm like, it makes me nauseous how good it is. And I'm like, fuck. But, but yeah, I mean, and then there's also guys like Theo Mendel, who's a good buddy of mine. And Theo Mindell more or less spearheaded the movement of the vintage revival traditional that, you know, I'm a part of, Rich Hardy's a part of, we're all a part of. I think a lot of that can be traced back to Theo Mindell, and he, I owe him like an insane amount of respect, and I have nothing but great words to say about Theo. But as far as people that are dead, O'Reilly, you know, obviously I'm gonna always have an appreciation for Birtcher. There's this dude named Tom Berg. He tattooed in San Francisco for a good part of his career, early in the 1910s and so on. And his stuff's just really cool. I like his stuff. Whenever I do Tom Berg shit, I find myself not having to change it a lot. And same with Lou Alberts. Lou Alberts is another tattoo artist from that time period where when I sit down and retrace a Lou Alberts piece, I find myself being like, this is how I would have done it. And I just leave it as is. Where some tattoo artists like Werlich, who was a German tattoo artist, I love his stuff, but I do find myself changing a lot of the details that Werlich would add. So,
how do you decide which ones are like what you want to leave? Is just your artistic taste? Like, I mean,
so whenever it comes to recreating old Flash, I always tell people find something. So you're going to see a piece of Flash that you're drawn to immediately. Let's say it's a dragon. And there's tons of dragons out there, but for whatever reason, you're really drawn to this dragon. Try to stop and think why you're drawn to that dragon. And if you're drawn to that dragon because it has flames around it, and those flames look kind of spiky. They're not like very smooth and flowy like flames usually are. They're very jagged and spiky. Well, when you retrace the Flash, be sure to leave that detail in because that's the detail that drew you to it. And you can change it all you want and modify it, you know, way past what it originally was, but be very conscious to leave what makes it unique still in there, you know. And for example, like a lot of Gus Wagner shit, he was not very good at drawing. He's a great artist, you know, but he really wasn't that good at drawing technically. But that's the charm of his stuff. So when you redo a Gus Wagner piece, leave some of that wonk in there, because if you polish it too much, it's going to lose that charm and it's going to look a little weird and you're not going to like it. And you're like, damn, why do I like the OG so much better? And it's because, well, you strayed a little bit too far off the path. So that's my advice for anybody that wants to learn how to trace old Flash. Identify about the piece what you like and leave it. So,
well, there was one thing I remembered I did want to ask you, and I feel like before we close it out, so I should have brought it up earlier, but things that other artists give you shit about. They give you shit about that you're copying old Flash, that you're.
Sure.
I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that complaint, but to be honest, I think it's a poor excuse, and I think the artists that say that know it. Yeah, and they're like it's
the one thing they can try and dig up on you. Well, yeah, because I would imagine that would be the case, because I know there's such a like strong. I see a lot of content where people are like copy, you know, like it's almost like it's very frowned upon to like copy somebody or something. But what and traditional makes no sense to me is like that was literally ingrained into it. They would send each other their Flash. You know, like Sailor Jerry was notorious for, or if he didn't like the guy, he would leave something out just to fuck him up, which is kind of a funny story. But I mean, but I was just going to say, like, to me, if you dug up one of these guys from over 100 years ago, and you're like, there's a guy in 2024 who just put that back piece on somebody, you think they wouldn't be like, that's fucking insane, that's awesome, you know? Like,
some probably would love it, some would maybe hate it. It's hard to say. But you can't persecute somebody for a crime when they themselves don't see it as a crime. Your buddy has a wife. He cheats on her. Well, you can bust his balls for cheating on his wife. But you go to Utah where they have multiple wives. There's no such thing as cheating. It's not a crime to them, you know, to the Mormons. So it's like, to traditional artists, copying and tracing a design isn't a crime. So you can't, it's like when people say you did this wrong thing, like copy a design, I'm like, well, it's not wrong. So
yeah,
it's just, it's a matter of ethics, I guess.
Well, and it's also like, name one artist that never copied any fucking, like, you know what I mean?
But
Like, you
thing
literally
is,
came up on
The
that.
problem is when you ask them to explain themselves, that's opening up you.
Right.
Like when you're like, well, name one artist who didn't do this bad thing.
Right.
But so then you're acknowledging it's a bad thing. Because then
Right.
you're like, fine. So yeah, I don't even acknowledge it as a bad thing. But
I think it's fucking sick. So.
I usually don't engage with people that pull that. I think it's such a cheap shot. It's very obvious when you look at my page that I don't draw my own shit. I don't try to hide it at all. If anything, I try to explain to people, I didn't draw this design. This design was done 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Here's the original artist that did it. And so, yeah, it's never been a concern of mine.
Yeah, well, I think it's fucking sick.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's very original to me and like unique. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you hosting us here in your
Of course, I'm glad.
in your room. It's fucking badass. You know, I get to look at some of the stuff before we leave. But yeah, man, I appreciate you doing this, and yeah, this has been a good conversation.
Thank you.
It was good to get come see the shop and see you and everything again.
Yeah,
good to be back.
It's been a while.
Hell yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's kind of cool to share it with Connor since he, you know.
Yeah, no, he's been here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for
Yeah,
having
man.
me.
Yeah,
Dude.
for sure.